All right. So, welcome everyone. This is our first in a series of 4 farm stress management education winter webinar series. We are really excited to bring this series to you from the University of Maryland Extension Farm Management team. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat pod. And at this time, I'm going to just give a shout out to our funding. This is through the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. We're partnering both with the USDA and the Northeast Young Farmers Union to offer these through the month of December. So you can see the next 3. If you would like to register for those, you can go to this go.umd.edu/farm family. That's our website where we have a lot of our resources located. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today, Dr. Alex Chan. Going to be giving a great presentation about from but to because. So Alex.
Thanks, Shannon. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. All right. So, like Shannon said, the title of my presentation is From But to Because, and this is actually a listening tool. And you may be wondering, okay, what does listening have to do with farm stress management? Well, I would argue that it has a lot to do with managing the farm enterprise, making important decisions business-wise and planning for the future. But it's also the listening tool that I'm going to be presenting to you all today is also one of personal value. So the hope is that, if you are, I understand that sometimes, especially maybe you just finished with this phase of the seasonal work, but you may be out in the fields, either, driving a piece of equipment or just kind of out on your own for a while. And a lot of times, if you've had a difficult interaction at home, that stress can spill over into your day-to-day work. And if your work tends to be by yourself, then that's going to be a long time every day, ruminating about what happened at home. So hopefully, the benefit of this tool is both helping you manage that spillover of stress into the work domain, but also helping you make decisions, because farm enterprises are often family affairs. Most of the farms that we have in Maryland are family operated. So there's a lot of communication and emotions that come into that, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you all today about. My background is in marriage and family therapy, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, but in my role with Extension, I serve as a state specialist for mental health. And this is one of my favorite presentations to give. And it's because it's so easy to communicate these concepts. It's just, it's my favorite. Also, my presentation style is such that, there's going to be plenty of time for question and answer at the end. However, if something occurs to you and you want to just pop it in the chat or interrupt me, I'm okay with that too. So don't be bashful about making this presentation, getting the most out of this presentation that you can. All right. So a little bit more, before I jump into the content, a little bit more about our program overall, the Farm Stress Management Program. So we are basing a lot of our activities on these concepts of observe, engage, and share. And you may have noticed some of those icons in the opening slide that Shannon was sharing. And they're basically helping us guide our support of each other in the farming community. So observe being tied to looking out for signs of stress and mental health issues, engage being how to communicate with somebody who's under stress, and then share being resources. So my talk today is going to be focused on observing and engaging, because we're talking about dialogue and managing family communications. But I will also be handing out or putting in the chat box a takeaway, like a flyer with more information. Yeah. All right, let's get into it. So home is where the heart is. That's kind of the the old saying that we like to say, that it's a refuge, you get back home at the end of the day, from your long day of work, and it's a place where you can recover. And this is true for a lot of us, except when it isn't, right? There are times when home is actually a source of strain. And if you are running a family business, home and work are kind of overlapping. So you may not have that distinct boundary between home and work. And for a lot of us who, work other jobs and started working from home during the pandemic, we experienced a taste of that as well. But especially, in the world of family-run business, which farms are a big part of, you can imagine you're out, in working all day. You want to know that what you're doing is valued, and maybe imagine you've been out, doing work longer than you imagine one day, and you get home and your spouse or somebody says, "Oh, where have you been? What took you so long? I feel like you're never home these days." Maybe you've had some conversations like that. And this is typical, especially in a profession like farming, where long hours and physical separation can, and contribute to that work and family strain. And what that means is that somebody may raise that issue when you get home. That's just one example. Separation. There may be many other issues that somebody raises when you get home, and this is actually an opportunity. A lot of times these like reunion points they can be where conflicts begin, but I'm actually going to share with you all a tool today about how to make those moments when somebody, you first get home and the reunion, is a stressful one. I'm going to be sharing with you a little tool on how to make that go as smoothly as possible, no matter what the issue is. All right. So to bring us a little humor and get us warmed up to more about the issue that we're going to be talking about, I'm going to share a video. Maybe some of you have seen it, but you may identify with either one of these characters in the video. It is, I'll warn you, it's a bit gendered, so don't take the man and the woman's characters in this to be that it's always that way. So let me reshare here so I can share my computer audio. And it's just about 1.5 minutes long. So, all right.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
All right. So let me reshare here. So again, that was definitely gendered, but because we know that sometimes the roles are reversed, doesn't matter what the relationship looks like. Sometimes that happens to us, where one person is trying to fix things and it's just not what the other person needs, or they're not even listening. That a lot of times, the complaints we're conditioned to try to, immediately solve things, and it's just not what people are looking for in those moments a lot of the times. Okay, so the rest of this presentation, we're going to focus on getting more quickly to the second half of that video, the listening part, and getting to that so that the people around you can feel supported, and so that conversations can move forward. When you're making tough business decisions, you don't want to waste time getting stuck on someone feeling like that the girl did in the video. So the skills that we're going to be talking about have use in a few situations that may be relevant for you all. Well, when your loved one is upset with you, that probably happens to all of us from time to time. If your loved one is complaining about something unrelated to you, this may also be a time when you can use the listening skills that we'll be talking about. And hopefully the video foreshadowed that it's not about having the answers and having the solutions, because a lot of times people just need to talk through things. Maybe someone brings an issue, that they might be managing some of the other workers on the farm, and it's their responsibility to kind of be the manager there, and they're not necessarily looking for solutions. They just kind of need to complain about how this person is getting off track, and they don't know how to use this piece of machinery. I thought they did, blah blah blah. They're just trying to share their experience with you. So again, another chance to use these skills. Also, definitely a time to use these skills would be disagreements about the family business. So in conversations that are related to business matters, it's very important to make sure that people feel fully heard and understood, because otherwise they're going to keep repeating themselves and slow the business meeting down because they're not getting the acknowledgement. And I think this is a unique factor of family businesses, because it blends the relationships where a lot of us, if we're at work with non-family people, coworkers, and we're kind of getting shut down, it's like, okay, that's annoying, but I guess I'll just sit back for a minute. But when it's family and it's a family business and you're not getting listened to, there's that extra layer of, why don't you care what I'm saying? So yeah, the disagreements about the family business, another time to use this. And then finally, disagreements about medical care. There are, we know from the ag census that, the average age of farm owners has been increasing, and that's true in Maryland, just like everywhere else. And so part of the conversations that you may be having with your family/business associates is medical decisions. And again, this is going to be really important that you show that you're really hearing people out as they explain what their desires are, what their fears are, and using that information to make decisions. Okay, so the skill that I'm going to be describing is called emotion coaching. That's just a fancy word for it, but I'll be referring to emotion coaching throughout this. And if you can't remember that, I'm sure you'll remember that there's really just two steps involved, and that's validation and support. So we'll get to that. But first, a little bit about emotion. So as you all are probably aware, emotion is sort of like an elevator, where at the top floor, where you're really overly hyped up, you don't have access to your reason and logic. And when you're running a farm or any kind of business enterprise, you need access to your logic and thinking skills in order to make sound decisions, avoid accidents, keep yourself safe. And so keeping your emotions in check is part of this. But sometimes we aren't able to do that entirely on our own. And there's no shame in that. That's, humans are social beings. We are meant to kind of co-regulate with one another, help each other through difficult times. So when you are able to skillfully respond to each other's emotion, what happens is that you get an increase in cooperation from the people you're responding to. So this may be helpful, whether it's family or just a coworker or someone you supervise. You get an avoidance of escalating the situation further, which is helpful in moving conversations forward. The skillful responses to emotion using our technique today will actually help de-escalate it as well. So it puts a lid on the emotion and helps you ride back down to the ground floor. And then over time, it builds the capacity for the person themselves to regulate in your presence because they know you get it. So that's really helpful. And there's actually some biology behind this, which I don't have enough time to get into, but suffice it to say, these pictures, give a visual overview of what happens, that the skillful responses to emotion is kind of like putting out a fire in the brain. There are certain active centers of the brain that are really lighting up when you're highly emotional, and that somebody else's caring response that is non-judgmental and open puts out that fire, and then helps build the bridge between emotions and the thinking center of your brain. Because emotions are a signal that, they are information. And so without that bridge between the thinking and the feeling centers, you won't really be able to get any information out of the emotions. You'll just kind of be reacting from that emotional state. Just angry and just spewing off, angry statements without being able to talk about where it came from or what the signal means. Like, what do you feel deprived of, or what do you feel needs to be changed, which is often the reason behind anger. Okay, so wish I had more time to get into the biology. It's really quite interesting, but for now, we'll focus on the practical skills. So again, like I said, the emotion coaching framework is really just two steps: validation and support. And the order of this is extremely important. So we don't want to jump, especially to practical support. That's at the bottom for a reason. We don't want to jump to support before providing validation. And this is true whether it's you coming home and your spouse is upset about something, or whether it's you having a family meeting with all the people involved in the farm business, or about another issue even. You don't want to jump to the solutions before the validation, and we'll explain why. But really, it is just these two steps. I think a lot of times, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was like a big push for things, they labeled like active listening, and there's all kinds of steps and things that you're supposed to do. And I don't know, I'm a therapist and I kind of roll my eyes at that. And so I think this is a lot simpler and feels more authentic. So let's get into it. What does validation mean? Well, first, what does it not mean? It's not praise. So this little comic here, kind of making fun of validation, the play on words there. If you can't see it, or if you're on the phone, there's a guy at a counter saying, "Will you validate my parking?" And the receptionist says, "Oh, you did a great job, evenly spaced, and nearly a perfect right angle." That's not validation. We're not just praising, what somebody else did. And we're not agreeing with it either. And it's not reassurance. So it's not saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay." It's definitely not problem solving. We all have our go-tos when people bring us issues. And you might think about, what is my go-to? What do I tend to do when people bring me problems? And feel free to drop this in the chat. What do you tend to do when somebody else brings you a problem, whether it's a fellow coworker or a family member? It may be different between the two. But again, if you work on a farm, maybe your coworkers are your family members. But yeah, what do you tend to do when people someone you care about brings you an issue that they're struggling with or starts complaining? Feel free to share in the chat. I know even though I'm trained as a mental health provider, I still struggle to not provide reassurance or jump to that, saying like, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Like, don't worry. You'll get through this." I even struggle at that. I think that is something that we are conditioned by our society to do. We have a really strong cultural push towards reassurance that it's going to be okay. Just pick yourself up and keep moving. So, okay, Kayla, I see you say you always try problem solving. Oh, no, that was Leslie. Okay, and Kayla says, "I usually say, 'I'm sorry to hear that.' And there are some people who respond, 'Why are you saying sorry?'" Yes, I think I'm one of those people. I think it not to give you a hard time, but I think it bothers me sometimes when people tell me they're sorry. Like, I don't want you to be sorry. I want you to see what I'm going through. Okay. So Chiel says, I think there is a normalization of trying to minimize. Oh, it'll be worse. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Silver linings. That's another one that I could have put up here. Validation is not silver linings. Okay, well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, this is all the stuff that we are definitely, conditioned to do, normalized. It's part of how we're raised. And there's no fault of ours that, this is just our first reaction, but we have other choices. Okay, so it's also not this. Well, I could understand why you might think, or feel or want to do something. What are you now tempted to say? I could understand why you feel that way. What three-letter word are you now tempted to utter? But, yeah, exactly. So that basically, the grammatical function of the word but is to negate what came before it. So if you are the speaker and somebody says this back to you, oh, I understand why you feel that way, but you'll be fine. It could be worse, then you're like, oh, yeah, but it doesn't even feel like you listened to what I said. So we definitely, and that's why it's the title of my presentation, definitely need to try to change that but into because. The first half of that statement is great. But our goal should be replacing it with because and following that up actually with three pieces of evidence that you do get it and that you aren't trying to cheer them up or give them any alternatives at first. The this material comes from a lot of family relations and family therapy type research where what people have observed is that the validation, for the person that's being heard, the speaker who has the issue, like the complainer, I know that sounds like a bad word, but it's just the most clear. The complainer, it feels best to the complainer better when you give multiple pieces of evidence. So we say, try to give 3 pieces of evidence that you understand their experience. So, and what that does is it shows that you're tapping into their internal experience so that you on the outside are getting what they're saying on the inside. And it doesn't feel as lonely or as alarming because now truly you are with them. Now you don't even have to say I'm here with you because you are showing that just by identifying their experience from their point of view. So that's the key here. It's not your interpretation. You're not saying, oh, I can understand why you might be sad, because, you are, and then you label their personality or something, but you give those becauses from their point of view. Like why would they say that they are sad? Or why would they say that they are upset about something? So then, only after you've conveyed an understanding of their experience and proven that you get it, only then do you offer the support, right? So you can do emotional or practical support, but it's important that it's after validation because the validation opens them up to your support. Without that, it's hard for them to trust what you have to say next because they're like, well, you didn't even listen to the story. Like you don't know the particulars. How am I to accept anything you have to say if you don't really understand the context? So validation and proving that you get it helps them trust that you do understand the context, or at least that you're trying, which feels good, feels better than dismissing. And what does support look like? Well, this is where you could bring in something like reassurance and hope. Comfort, if it's a family member, you may give them a hug. I don't know if you hug your coworkers, maybe not, depending on how well you know them, but Definitely togetherness is a way of providing emotional support, saying, okay, well, let's figure this out together. I don't want you to have to go through this by yourself. Like, let's think through some ideas here. And that kind of goes along with problem solving. So, practical support is appropriate at times, and it is what people want sometimes, but a lot of the times maybe they don't need that. So that's why, in the previous slide, emotional support is, part A, and then part B is practical. Practical is at the bottom. It's, what you save for the end, and you might not even offer it unless they ask, which, depending on the person, it may be really hard for them to ask, but definitely save it for the end. Taking over, I think the other words are a little more self-explanatory. Taking over, sometimes you may not be able to do that in all situations, but especially if it's somebody who's if it's a coworker and they're new, or if you're doing this with someone who's younger, like a child in your family, taking over may be more appropriate. So, but yeah, sometimes the practical support may need to be that you take the reins of something temporarily. So let's get back to our elevator analogy. You can imagine that the power of this formula that I'm giving you is such that you start, the statement, I can imagine you feel, and actually in the handout that I give, there's going to be suggestions for other ways to just say that. So it doesn't always have to sound so therapist-y. But you start that, and they're at high emotion, but every because you give lowers the intensity, because they're like, oh yeah, you get it. Oh yeah, you do get it. Oh, you really understand. And then finally, the door is open for support. Each piece of evidence that you are giving them from their perspective is part of the process to reducing that high emotionality and really giving them the support that they need, which is sometimes just validation. All right. So let's go through a little mental exercise here. I'm going to use a regulatory example, just because we may have examples like this in our lives in the ag industry. So I want you to actually think about if you work on a farm, think about the pesticide inspector showing up. And if you don't work on a farm, just imagine that this is somebody who, it may be a really easy visit, or it may be a visit full of, pain and suffering because, somebody else's pesticides are drifting over to your space and blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of reasons why you might not pass. And so imagine that this inspector is here and they're saying you're out of compliance. We found problems, and they, but that there's more to the story. And so you're very resistant. Put yourself in that resistant state. The state where you're like, I don't want to, I can't agree with this. I can't agree that I'm out of compliance. There's no way that this is true. Okay. And now put yourself in that state, and I'm going to be the inspector. And imagine I'm saying, okay, I understand why this is upsetting for you, but the law is the law. Sorry, we gotta take care of this. You're probably like, ugh, no, get off my property. Because it feels like shutting you down. So put yourself back in that resistant state. I don't see anyone's cameras, but maybe you're making kind of a mean face. And now listen again. What if the inspector had gone through this training and was like, okay, I understand. I can understand why, you're upset right now, because, you've always had, a clean report every year. And because you're thinking about all the cost and all the relationship struggles that this is going to, cause you with your neighbors, and because you just don't have time right now to deal with this. I get that. Whoa. Sounds like they might actually get what it's like to get, they might actually understand what it's like to get that out of compliance report. And they might actually be, able to listen to you about your side of the story. Feel that hopefully you felt a difference there between your mindset in hearing me talk both ways. It's probably a lot more common that people speak the first way, like, sorry, it's the law, you're out of compliance. But if people use this more emotion-focused approach, you're not being a therapist. It doesn't require special training to say things like that. But what it does is it really lowers the guard. And hopefully you experienced that just now, just in hearing me talk, right? So, and then this is the, again, just a summary of the formula here. You give the understanding, because, and then offer support in that order. I want to bring up resentment for a minute, just because I know that in asking you all to try to be more empathic towards others in your workplace, in your home, and on the farm, it's going to be tough if you don't feel that your needs are being met by that person either, especially in the case of family, more so than the coworkers, or the people that just come to the farm to work. You may, this is why the family and business mixture adds complexity, because there may be personal family issues, like one spouse doesn't feel that the other is generally available or meeting their needs on a personal scale, that farm notwithstanding. And so there's going to be resentment, like, why should I try to get their perspective when they don't get mine? Or why should I try to be empathic towards them when they're the ones coming in hot? I've been out, riding the tractor all day, taking care of the things that need to get done by myself. And I come home to like an assault. Why should I be sensitive? Well, your needs matter too. And to the extent that you do skillfully express your own needs, you will also be able to get, more of that support. But whoever raised the issue is going to have to be heard before they can hear yours. And so that's just kind of there's no avoiding that. Like, somebody eventually is going to go first in raising an issue, and their thing has to be heard first. And if in the back of your mind, you're wondering, like, when are my needs going to be met? Then this will need to be the topic of a separate conversation with your loved one. And hopefully this is, and I say loved one because probably this is happening not just in a coworker setting, but more in definitely the family setting. This will have to be the topic of a separate conversation. So if you're thinking as your loved one is speaking to you that you feel powerless, unheard, blamed, whatever, any of those things on the left-hand side there, take note of that, and don't bash them with it in the first conversation, but definitely use your emotion coaching skills to help them through their difficult emotion first, and then bring up this issue in a separate conversation where you raise the issue. You say, hey, when I've had a long day, and and the first thing I hear is that you're like, where have you been? It's hard for me to respond to you in the way that you need, and also it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I'm just the bad guy, or that I'm being judged, or that I don't even want to go home, and we need to talk about that, so you can bring that up sensitively, skillfully later. But the point is, if you're holding on to that resentment and you're throwing it at them when they raise the issue, then it's just going to cycle through that conflict over and over and over again. So the emotion coaching is the way to actually resolve conversations so that things don't keep lingering and repeating themselves. All right, since we love pictures, another analogy here besides the elevator sometimes is that our emotion coaching skill is sort of like breaking down the walls of a castle. Like, every because you give, makes somebody more and more open to where when you offer support, they actually might be able to hear it. And just a reminder, you do all this stuff, logic, reassurance, redirection, without the validation, you will feel like you're banging your head against the wall if you don't already feel that way with some of your people. So try this skill out. See how it works for you. I have summary handouts that I'll put in the chat in just a second. A few more practical tips. Validation is critical, and it's a two-step process. So, there is the order of it matters. The validation is first. Whack-a-mole, step 2, it says play darts and whack-a-mole. I like to think about that as like the guessing game. It feels better to know that somebody's trying to get your experience genuinely and sensitively than them necessarily getting it right the first time. If this is new to you, if this is not your accustomed way of talking to your family members, it's going to take practice to make it feel more genuine, but also to get better at, the empathizing piece. And so to show that that's where you're at, you can use tentative language, like, maybe you're feeling that way because, maybe it might feel like this, just show that you're not trying to tell them how they feel, but that you're trying to guess. And so, yeah, sometimes it may feel like whack-a-mole, but you have to be willing to accept that you might get it wrong, but it's still worth the effort. And then finally, of course, be mindful of your nonverbals. Alrighty, so that is my content. Now I'd love to entertain questions and stop sharing. And let me put my handouts in the chat for you to download. This is just a summary of the content from today so that you can practice again at home. There's some tips as well as like a script builder where you could even write out some things that you tend to hear from your loved ones and plan your response. So it's a little easier. Bear with me while I locate those documents. And also remember, this will take practice. It'll feel more natural over time. But remember those situations. It will help you get through, the interpersonal situations. It'll help get through those, business meetings where you keep going in circles and circles. It'll help you really show that you're listening in those situations and actually get through them faster because you won't have so many repetitions. And we could all use a little more time, especially in business meetings, to not waste so much time repeating ourselves just because somebody feels unheard. So, all right, I think I found them. Any questions? All right, so there's one document and another document. So there's two handouts for you to work with there. And as a reminder, okay, glad you found it helpful, Leslie. Would love to also entertain any like, well, what about this or what about that, or can you explain this again?
Alex, I loved your presentation. I think one of the most challenging things for me is when somebody is upset or their mood is elevated and I'm trying to get through the becauses. I often really struggle with not bringing my personal experience into it instead of focusing on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, if you have any strategies for dealing with that or.
Yeah, so I would, part of it is that depending on the similarities between you all, maybe some of your experience does fit, but also that's where the tentative piece comes in. So you don't have to necessarily claim that you have certainty about what they're going through. That's, you can guess. You can say, well, I bet, from your perspective that, this is what's going on for you. I bet this, or I wonder if it's this. You can start with your experience, but then part of it is thinking about, like, based on what I know about this person and their personality and what they tend to say, how can I, if I were them, what would I be saying? So it's not parroting back what they say. You're not just like repeating what they say, but you can also think about it as like, if I were to retell the story and I was pretending to be them, what would I say?
Awesome, thanks. I never realized this was such a problem in like common conversation until my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and people would visit and they would be like, "Oh yeah, I forget things too." And I'm like, literally, no, you just think you're forgetful. She has a brain disease. And that's when I started thinking about like, are people just ignorant in some ways, or are they just like awkward in what they're saying? And then I wanted to try to make sure that I'm not doing that, but I realized that I also do that.
Yeah. And that may be their attempt at reassurance, but it doesn't necessarily feel good to you because they're not giving you the validation up front. All right, so I know some folks don't have questions, so they're signing off, but we do have an evaluation for you. So before you sign off, okay, thanks, Shannon. Shannon put that in the chat, but I'm still happy to answer questions. I wanted to make the presentation part a little shorter because I know it's a complex topic. So any other questions that people have or concepts? All right, well then I hope, I'm actually going to put my email in the chat too, so that if you wanted to ask me a question privately, or if you had a group, I do longer versions of this presentation. For example, tomorrow I'll actually be in person at the Eastern Shore Higher Education Center doing a more expanded version of this, specifically around the issue of estate and farm succession planning. So we'll be covering that with my colleague Paul Geringer, who's a legal specialist. So we'll be down there in Queenstown. So if any of you have last minute interested in coming to that, we will accept walk-ins too. So let me know. But yeah, I do give longer presentations that are tailored to specific issues. So if you're interested in that, or if you're interested in other farm stress presentations, give me a holler. And yeah, thanks for your attention today, and thanks for attending.